الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد. إخواني, as part of the effort that has been going on in this masjid, I have been asked by Brother Abdul for me to chip in and participate in the lectures that have been designed to bring some awareness to our youth. And I do have boys who are about 13 to 12 in age. So I do understand the significance and the importance of these kind of lectures. And I really appreciate it. Having said that, I must note that when Brother Abdul introduced me, he called me Sheikh, and I think that's very generous of him. I'm not really qualified to be called Sheikh. I'm just one of the average Muslims trying to share whatever benefits that they can extract from the readings I do. So that needs to be, I need to fully disclose that. I cannot be really characterized as a Sheikh. Tonight, my presentation, I wouldn't call it lecture, because the lecture requires a lot of academic preps. So it's going to be, I'm going to call it a meal presentation. My presentation will be about Suratul Asr. And I chose Suratul Asr, or the surah of the time, for it being one of the most comprehensive surah in the Quran. It can be really described as the summary of the Wahy. It summarizes what this Islamic religion is all about. And because of these presentations or lectures are particularly designed for the youth, I think it fits the occasion that I talk about the big picture. You know, when you are young, in the age of our youth, sometimes the message gets lost in the complexities that Sheikhs talk about. So I wanted to make it simple and inshallah ta'ala understandable for them to understand the basic message of this religion. يقول الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه العزيز: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. That is Suratul Asr. It's very short, very concise, and very simple. Even in the standard of the Arabic language, the language that's used in that surah are very simple. You know, Quran sometimes becomes very challenging in its linguistic composition, very eloquent. So Suratul Asr, without leaving the eloquence part of it, it's still eloquent surah, but the language that's used is very simple. It starts, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by oath of the time. Asr. And that itself, why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala need to swear or to make an oath when He's talking to His simple creatures or creation? You know, the way we think about oath is usually with respect to bring some credibility and integrity of what we are telling to other people. There are legal oaths that are carried out in the courts. There are traditional ways of doing the oath. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't need to do an oath, but it signifies Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, is speaking to us in the way we understand things. He wants us to grab our attention and say, this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala making an oath, signifying the seriousness of the message that will follow. Why would He then choose to swear by time? Why time? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, in various occasion is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is swore by time. وَالضُّحَى وَالْفَجْرِ وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا تَجَلَّى. Those are the times. So Asr, you know Asr, كلمة العصر in local Arabiya signifies something that's about to recede, you know, like a juice. Sometimes you squeeze. So Al-Asr is the time of the day when the sun is about to recede. It's about going to disappear from us. It signifies the last part of the day, when the sun is ever receding, disappearing from us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by swearing by the time, tries to make us understand the importance of our time in two ways. That every one of us has a time. No one, you know, as long as you are alive, you do have a time. You do have a time to change things the way you like. You do have a time to correct your course of your life. And also, time is what we measure our existence in life. Anything that takes place in the world is measured by time. You know, think about the sports. They are measured by time. Think about anything you can think about is measured by time. We are measured by how old we are. We have a limited time in this life. So time is quite significant. It's also a very fundamental structure of the universe. There are scientific methods developed to make the relationship between time and space. So time is really the essence of the universe. I mean, it's a very fundamental structure of it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings that to our attention, that time is very important. And also, when you have a limited time and you are dealing with so many different distractions from doing the important things, you know, time is a variable. It's a factor in your life. You cannot ignore it. Then after the oath, which I said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does it because He wants it to make the message very serious. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. Insan, meaning the mankind, the humanity, regardless of gender, regardless of age, regardless of religion. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says all humankind, all the humanity is in a desperate need to survive, for survival. In other translations, it can be interpreted that all mankind are in loss. They are in loss. And loss, as you know, is when you really lose something that you own. When you invest, if you are a businessman and you invest something in a business that you thought would be a good, profitable venture, and you lose your capital and you lose your everything, that's a loss. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, entire humanity is in desperate need for survival. So Suratul Asr is about survival. When you are told that you are on the verge of being doomed, being lost, then you would ask, or one wonders, what should I need to do to avoid that loss, or to rescue myself, or to survive, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described. And then follows the 4 conditions, which I thought was the most simple, comprehensive way of describing Islam that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals. Everyone will be lost except the following: إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاسَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاسَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi, one of the great scholars. And remember, every scholar had a critique, had a shortcomings, and Fakhruddin is not exception. He had his failings, but he was a great scholar. Tafsir al-Kabir was his signature books that he wrote. He said, with relation to Suratul Asr, he said, the salvation of the human being hinges on the 4 conditions described in Suratul Asr. What are they? They are, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, al-Iman. Iman here is belief, it's also knowledge. So, you have to have knowledge in your Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the faith in this religion, the belief that the message that messengers told us is true, even though you might not always prove it. Faith means that believing the unseen, something that you cannot see. We can never see the hellfire, can never see the paradise, we just believe them. So that's the faith. But you need a knowledge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one, cannot be two, that He has characteristics that are unique to Him. That's the Iman part. And to elaborate Iman, one can go back and review how Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam described the Iman. You know, there is a pillars of Iman that one needs to know. You need not only believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Muhammad salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, but you also need to believe the books of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which means the Bible and Torah and Quran. You need to believe the Rusul, meaning the Musa alayhi salam and Isa and Nuh, which means in today's world, if you have that knowledge that you ought to be respecting and believing in the kutub, however they have been contaminated or mischaracterized or changed or altered, you still have to respect the Bible. Because that was the origin, it has origin in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed. You need to respect Christ, as they call it here. We call it Isa alayhi salam in the Quran. So that's the Iman. You need to do that. You need to believe in Qadr, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has preordained things that will happen no matter what you do. You also need to believe that you have a will to do things, but that will not change what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribed. So the first part is Iman. And we cannot mention Iman without mentioning a knowledge. Knowledge. It's very important. If you proclaim that we believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and at the same time your actions and your deeds do not reflect what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala desires, that's a sign of ignorance. And the best way to solidify and strengthen your Iman is to learn your religion. Not only learn your religion, but also learn all the beneficial subjects that you cannot succeed in this life without them. We still need to have professionals, we need to have engineers and doctors, we need to have mathematicians and physicists. These are essential subjects and disciplines that the world cannot go without them. So when Islam talks about Iman and knowledge, it's not really limited to the knowledge of the literature concerning the ahadith and the tafasir. That's not only what you need to know and learn. There are other important stuff that you need to learn in order to be competitive in this world. And sometimes, as it often happens, when you listen to the lectures of the scholars, it looks like we're always going back and looking back, talking about the age when Islam was a representative of a civilization that was a pioneer in every field. The first hospital was developed by Muslims. The foundation of knowledge, which is the computation, the zero element in this great algorithm that we use, the computers and stuff. Algebra was a Muslim. Even algorithm, the word algorithm itself is the name of the Muslim scholar Al-Khwarizm, who developed some of those logic. So that's the age, but it has been a while since Muslims did something comparable, or even compared to what those generations achieved. So coming back to the time gives you that experience, that things that you can compare. So you can compare how Muslims were 500, 600 years ago to how they are today. And as a young person, you can try and work toward improving that situation of your fellow co-religions. So, Iman, we said Iman is the first condition that you need to have in order to survive Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you do not have faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you do not believe in Allah, I guess the consequence is that you are ready to find out whether what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran is true or not. And believe me, you don't want to be wrong, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a very clear message in the Quran that you don't want to take that risk. You better believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, stick with it. You better, and it's easily justifiable and understandable that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator of this world. I mean, it's just going against every reason and rational way of thinking to say just these things happen by accident. Iman is the first condition. The second condition is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, amal salih. So what is amal salih? Because there is an attribute after amal. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't say إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا. He didn't say وَعَمِلُوا only, he said وَعَمِلُوا صَالِحَاتٍ. So what is that? Why the attribute? What does it signify? The attribute of salih. Al-ulama, Muslim scholars talked about this, and they said what makes a work that you do, this work, whether it's a direct worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the things that Muslims routinely do, prayers, fasting, going to the pilgrimage, paying the charity and zakah, those are the clearly defined elements and acts of worship. So, but you could also worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by doing other things that might not be routinely prescribed, like helping, a needy person, by teaching, by leading the prayers, by any work you do can be classified as a worship as long as you have the intention. So what makes that work salih? Muslim scholars said for a work or a deed to become a salih, it has to have a following condition. It has to be the following criteria. First, it has to have ikhlas, a good intention. If you just happen to be practicing and praying Salat al-Maghrib without having the intention to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, without having the intention of understanding that it's a mandatory for you to do it, then it's really a waste, because you need to have that intention that you're doing this not because of a habit, but because of you are conscious about what happens if you do not do. So first is the intention, a good intention, which is al-ikhlas. A second is compliance. Salat al-Maghrib is 3 rak'at. You do have the intention and you really mean it, but if you pray 4 instead of 3, is it going to be a Salat al-Maghrib or something else? It's not going to comply with how Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam prayed Salat al-Maghrib. So you are not complying with how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted it done. So you have the ikhlas and the good intention, but you have to still comply with how it's supposed to be done. The third is Husnul Khatimah. وَنَسْأَلُ اللَّهَ حُسْنُ الْخَاتِمَةِ. Meaning you have the ikhlas, You did it the way the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam have done it. But somehow, after doing it 40 years or 35 years or 50 years, you quit. And you die that way. So that's really bad. So you have to have husnul khatimah. You have to have a good conclusion to your life. Really, you can imagine, it's a waste of time if one has been worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for 40 years, and after 40 years, that person quit, and then die that way. You can imagine everything prior to that will not be accounted. It's going to be waste. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's a very decisive, when you die, how you meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you're a Muslim, it's what is needed. If you're not Muslim, and you chose not to be Muslim, and you die that way, that's a su'ul khatimah. Wal-'iyadu billah. So the amal, wal-'amalu salih. So we said there are 4 conditions. The first condition is iman. Second condition is amalu salih. We said what makes amalu salih? Amalu salih is those 3 criteria that you need to meet. You know, imagine, or for example, imagine an email. If you were to compose an email and send to someone that you want to get that message from you to that person, there's a way to do it. You can't just click, you can't just open your Gmail and send it. It's not going to work. You have to have the address right, maybe subject right, maybe you have to click the send button, and maybe you have to log in before you do anything. So those are 10 criteria. I mean, for your amal to be accepted, there are certain criteria that you have to follow. Just in our life, everything, you have to do something in order for your work to be considered and accepted. That's the second condition, amal salih. Think about it. The 2 conditions I just mentioned can be done individually. You don't have to do it in a group. You can be Muslim by yourself. I mean, you can have your iman, you have the knowledge, and also you can do the salawat, siyam, zakah by yourself individually. But look and pay attention to the following 2 conditions, the third and the fourth. The third condition is وَتَوَاسَوْا بِالْحَقِّ, meaning after you have the iman and the knowledge, and after you practice what you know and comply with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mandatory ibadat, then you need to enjoy what's right, encourage haqq. In other words, you are nothing if you fail to transmit your own values to your children, to your household, to your brothers and sisters, to your cousins, and to the larger community. If you're just a good person that does not benefit anyone, that does not participate the good things that happen surrounding you, then you are a failure. And the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Suratul Asr says, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا wa, there is a wow between amal salih and iman, and there is a wow between amal salih and tawasi bil haqq, and there is a wow between tawasi al haqq or tawasi bil sabr. The wow here means and. For those of you who went to an engineering school or understand the logics, and means if you do 3 and you fail to do the 4th, it's not accepted. It's not going to work. You have to do all 4. You have to do all 4 for that amal to be accepted, or for you to survive. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it, they are all connected. Iman, amal salih, and the work that you do to transmit that message, that truth, those values and the qiyam, to those you can reach. You invite people to, if you have children, some of us do, you would want your children to have your own values. And how do you feel they don't gain those values, if they don't, absorb those values that you have, if they The values we have is just being Muslim, fasting, practicing Islam as much as they can, going to good schools, graduating, getting degrees. And don't get the Suratul Asr wrong. Suratul Asr is not saying you cannot work in the dunya. Working in the dunya and gaining wealth is not prohibited. What is prohibited is falling in love with dunya, loving it to the extent that it ruins your life. So that's what hubb dunya is. What is not desired. What is prohibited is hubb dunya. But living in here requires a certain level or certain degree of effort from your part to live a good life, to work, to raise a family, to buy cars. All those are good things. As long as you do it in a halal means and you do it legally. But if you're working for those things, that's when you get astray. That's when you really not following the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we said, I'm still trying to be as simple as I can. Al-Iman, which we said is the faith with the knowledge. If you don't have a knowledge, but you still think you have a faith, you do what people do. Let me give you maybe a controversial example. In a recent media coverage, you have seen a simple, ignorant guy made a very stupid video clip. He uploaded it on YouTube. It became accessible by millions of people. If you look at the reactions from some Muslims, you can really sense the ignorance I'm talking about. It's good to show the world that you have a muqaddasat, things that are sacred, that you don't want to be messed up with or messed around with. You want to defend those values and those muqaddasat. But if you do that by destroying properties or killing people or even killing yourself, then it really becomes something else. You're not following the message right. For you to register your displeasure and disappointment and your anger that Nabiyyuna Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has been depicted in the wrong way, that's the correct course. But doing that does not require you to kill people, does not require you to destroy property that Muslims own, does not require you to kill, actually to get other people, other Muslims got killed. So you can see, people have a faith, but the knowledge is not there. When you don't have a knowledge, and you are led by emotions and anger, that is a dangerous thing. So you have to have an iman, which means you have to have a knowledge. You have to do amal salih, which we described, and you have to encourage, invite, work toward realizing and trying to invite people to the truth that you possess. You have Islam, which is a really great, it's a great benefit from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He made us Muslims. There are many people who are smarter than we are, who are more educated than we are, more wealthier. Still, they don't believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made us Muslims. So that truth and the message of this Islamic religion, you gotta share with other people in a way that's reasonable, that's productive. That's التواصي بالحق. والتواصل بالصبر is the last condition for survival, and it is that knowing what do you do, the iman you have, and the a'mal as-salihah that you are doing, and the da'wah that you are involved. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be cheap. It's going to require a patience and perseverance and steadfastness. You have to persevere. You have to have a patience. And actually, Sahaba ridwanullahi alayhim, they used to recite Suratul Asr before they depart from each other. because it contains all those four conditions. So asabr is a very important element in the survival that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says is necessary. That is the four conditions for survival in Suratul Asr. That's one lesson. The second lesson is, in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Suratul Asr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sets the standard for success and failure. What is success and what is failure? Every culture and every religion, every community in the world have some basic notions of success. Everybody has. For the nomad who looks after camels and goats and cattle, they have success on their own level. For people who live in urban centers, they do have some notion of success. Someone graduating from high school, we call it successful. Someone who drops out, failed. Someone who applies a job and gets hired, succeeded. Someone who didn't succeed. Someone who creates a business and the business takes off, profitable venture, that person succeeded. So we have notions of success in every level. Someone who applies to college and gets admission, that's success. Someone who was not accepted, it's not a success. But in Surah Al-Asr, the standard is different. And I said most of every culture and every community have a notion of success. What do they have in common? They do have in common that success is described in terms of wealth. That's very common. In terms of power and status, that's very common. That's why we have celebrities. That's why we have leaders and kings and queens and princes. So that's success in most cultures and most communities. But Quran, especially in Surah Al-Asr, objects to that notion and brings something else. And the question is, if wealth and status is a success, then what happened to Fir'aun? Fir'aun built one of the most beautiful architecture in the world. He left behind monuments, world monuments, wonders that still are a destination to millions of tourists in the world. He was a king. In fact, he claimed that he was more than a king, didn't he? I mean, he claimed that he was a god. He had unchallenged power and status. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, Fir'aun is not depicted as a successful person. He's not. I mean, in fact, he is depicted as one of the epitome of failure, a height of failure. He failed to realize that he is not what he thought he was. What about Qarun? Qarun was the wealthiest, one of the wealthiest persons in the world. He had a great treasure and wealth. He was a successful businessman. He owned, gold, you name it. But in the Quran, Qarun is not a successful person. He was not described or depicted in the Quran as a successful person. So what is success then? So success, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, is someone who has a faith, poor or rich. Whether you are poor or rich, it doesn't matter. If you have a faith, have a knowledge, does a good work, honest, with integrity, good work, and transcends beyond his own self, so benefits other people. And also, consistency. Is consistent and he dies that way. That's a very successful person in the light of the Quranic teachings. So that's what success is. But people forget that they are vulnerable, that they are prone to decline, that they can lose the power they have, the wealth they have. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala started Suratul Asr by swearing the time. Time is very important actually. It teaches you a lot of lessons. So in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَنذِرِ النَّاسَ يَوْمَ يَأْتِيهِمُ الْعَذَابُ فَيَقُولُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا رَبَّنَا أَخِرْنَا إِلَىٰ أَجَلٍ قَرِيبٍ. When the time comes, people would wish that they had enough time to prepare. رَبَّنَا أَخِرْ إِلَىٰ أَجَلٍ قَرِيبٍ أَخِرْنَا إِلَىٰ أَجَلٍ قَرِيبٍ نُجِبْ دَعْوَتَكَ وَنَتَّبِعْ الرُّسُلَ. Look at this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, this is called a rhetorical question. أَوَلَمْ تَكُونُوا أَقْسَمْتُم مِّن قَبْلُ مَا لَكُم مِّن زَوَالٍ. أَوَلَمْ تَكُونُوا أَقْسَمْتُم مِّن قَبْلُ مَا لَكُم مِّن زَوَالٍ, which can be translated, did you not swear before that you will never suffer decline, that you will never die, or you will never lose your power, or you never lose your business, or you know. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that's the importance of time. They were very powerful, very wealthy yesterday, they died today, and now they are complaining that they need more time. So those are the lessons of Suratul Asr. That to survive in this dunya, you need 4 conditions to survive. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that's the standard of success and failure. That's very much all I have to say. And I conclude أن يغفر الله ذنوبنا سبحانه وتعالى وأن يتقبل أعمالنا. صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبته ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين.